Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julien Haye in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Bonjour and welcome to the latest episode of RiskMasters with Aurore Lecanon, the Seasoned Chief Risk Officer in the insurance industry. In today's episode, Aurore takes us through a unique journey from an early days as a financial quant to becoming a key leader in risk management. She offers insightful perspectives on the critical integration of sustainability into corporate strategy, the challenges of navigating cultural and gender dynamics in a leadership position, and the future of risk management in an increasingly complex world. In this episode, you will learn more about 1. Integrating sustainability into risk frameworks, 2. Gender dynamic and leadership in risk management, and 3. Emerging trends and innovations in risk strategy. You can find more information on my website, avtm.com, including the recap article and notes of today's episode, as well as a wealth of thought leadership articles on risk and compliance management. And now more about Aurore. Aurore is an experienced chief risk officer with a diverse background in asset and liability management and financial risk. She has held senior roles in major firms such as Aviva, Mutual, Prudential, and Direct Line, and is known for a strategic approach to embedding sustainability into risk frameworks and corporate decision-making. We recorded this interview live at the Risk Life conference in London in June 2024, and now, without further ado, I give you Aurore Lecanon. Aurore, welcome. It's my pleasure today to welcome Aurore Lecanon to our podcast. Aurore, would you like to give us a little bit of background about who you are and where you come from?
Thanks, Julien. Feeling very honored to be here today, my first ever podcast. Where do I come from? I come from France, as you can already hear from my accent. Moved to the UK in 2004, started to work in insurance industry, however, in 2000s, pretty much by birth. I was in insurance in some way, shape or form. Been very loyal to it, worked for large insurance such as Aviva, Mutual, Prudential, and recently Direct Line, so both the life insurance and the non-insurance side. Most of my career has been actually doing in what they call first line of defense jobs, so in asset liability management. I'm a French quant by background, not an actuary, but in 2015, I made the move into risk, first in financial risk. And if you had asked me at the time, do you want to become a chief risk officer, I would have told you absolutely no way. I don't know what they do. And I turned out to take quite a few chief risk officer roles for the last few years. And I think what I love about it is the strategic perspective, albeit different from that of a CEO or a CFO, that it gives you on the business and that holistic view that you have about every drivers of risk that are making the business tick.
And I think it's one of the rare functions where you have that holistic view with the CEO and potentially the CFO.
It is a privilege.
Yeah.
I often say to my team, it is a luxury that most people don't have because it's a responsibility, and you are being asked a lot. You are being asked to be very detailed, being able to zoom in into the detail and zoom out very quickly to join the dots and see the big picture. But I think for somebody who is curious about understanding what business is, that's such a rare opportunity to influence it for the better.
And what did you find the most challenging in your career path in doing all of that?
Kind of knew you were going to ask this question, and I'm going to be disappointing a lot, but I think, and my husband would probably disagree, but I think I had it pretty easy to that. Look, most of the challenges you meet in your careers, let's be honest, they are about people. So if I was to choose one challenge I had was I moved into the UK not being an actuary, but working with actuaries all the time who were paid more than me, not because I was a woman and they were men, but because they were actuaries and I was not. And then that adaptation to the British culture, especially at C-suite level and in the boardroom, which I'm still making in some ways, because continental European people, we tend to be a bit more straight talking than a lot of our British colleagues. And those are the little challenges and cultural challenges that I've experienced across my career, but you learn from that and you get stronger and better because of it.
And in that context, and you kind of started touching a little bit on that, but was your gender in any way a consideration in your career path or not at all?
The only time it was a consideration is that what I thought when I started to get to the level below ExCo, I had this in my mind that I should never work for women because they were terrible. And that I had this idea that I was working with men much, much more easily. I've completely changed my mind over the last 7 to 10 years. There's so many women leaders who have had an influencing role on me at a personal and professional level. But at the time, I felt that either women were too strong and trying to emulate men, and therefore not necessarily being the best bosses, or were too soft. I think in reality, women are not soft. They are, however, rounder. And I think it's such an important quality. I was part of a workshop last week for the Financial Times non-executive director diploma, and it came up from testimonies from current non-executive directors quite a few times, where they put on examples in the table where a woman's perspective is different than a man's perspective on how to tackle an issue. But I think we bring a much, much rounder approach, much more holistic perspective of an issue than sometimes men do. Sometimes it becomes paralyzing because you don't focus on getting to the decision, but sometimes it makes the debate so much, much, much richer. So I think I've always leveraged being a woman in that sense, and I've never felt it as a barrier, but as an enabler.
So can I ask, how did sustainability came in your background and how you touched on it?
So I think, like most people, it came through the climate risk angle. And I was just joking with my fellow panelists earlier because they were talking about climate value at risk. And I said, don't ask me any questions about that. I don't know anything about that. And then I realized that my first job in the UK in 2005 was actually to model catastrophic weather events for Aviva. So I lied. I knew about climate value at risk a long time ago. I think over the last few years, as you progress your career, you become much more aware of all the drivers which are hidden behind the surface of a commercial strategy, and a lot of it is people. Now, from people to climate, there's only just one little step. That concept of the triple bottom line of planet, profit, and people, which came up in 1995, is something which has more and more being brought to the front of the discussions I lead or I participate in at the ExCo level over the last 5 years. How do you make your business resilient? How do you make your business sustainable? And you can't do it without making sure that people, planet, and profit are taken care of. More specifically, as a chief risk officer, obviously, I have had to deal with climate risk modeling in capital models. I have had to deal with regulatory reporting requirements. And at Direct Line, I was the sponsor of a planet pillar from an ExCo perspective rather than as a chief risk officer. So I had visibility across all climate initiatives across the business, which were having an impact on our strategic goals, effectively.
And clearly coming from insurance, you had no choice because that's part of your business in terms of protecting other businesses from a risk standpoint. Clearly the climate side, for example, came probably much later to a lot of other industries and you guys will have that done. And I think what you just said is a very good segue to the next question around, do you believe that you need to have a comprehensive sustainability strategy or separately from the rest, or do you need to have it integrated into your business strategy?
So I might be a little bit polemic there, but I think it's a mistake to have a separate sustainability strategy. I think it might be a way to to get there. But I think the reality is, if you think about sustainability as I defined it, which is the long-term future of a business and your organization, then unless you integrate it fully in your thinking and through different lenses, the EVS, the G, everything, the social impact you make, then it's going to at some point failing. It's the same thing with culture. I often, as a chief risk officer, hate when people say, oh, let's define the risk culture. Risk culture should not be separate from culture. It's a lens with which you look at culture, but it should definitely not be separate. So for me, we are on the same journey of having sustainability at the core of the businesses. And if you look at some businesses which have been super successful out of the financial services sector, like Unilever, they really were deciding that they wanted to breathe sustainability throughout the organization.
And I think it's a lens across all type of risks, right? We were talking about geopolitical risk this morning. It's the same thing. You cannot create a strategy and business objective without considering all the lenses. Otherwise, you're leaving very important side to it. And from your perspective, what are the core components and considerations in embedding those things into risk framework and risk strategies and mitigation?
So it's exactly what you just said. So once you have some sort of strategic alignment about sustainability, what it means for the company, the purpose of the company, the commercial strategy, and therefore the risk strategy, I think the next step is to consider to be very holistic about it, because actually, especially for insurance companies, it's pervasive to our entire risk profile. Especially if you start thinking about, stop just looking at climate and think about society impact and the impact you have on society. So I think having that holistic view is a super important one. So starting from the top to the bottom before doing the bottom-up identification of risk. The second thing is the time horizon. The difficulty with things like sustainability is that it's like in politics. You have a 3-year, 5-year government in place, less in France, I would say. Survival is a few months if you are in government in France. But you do need to drive decisions which are going to have an impact in 15 years. And that's the difficulty with traditional risk management framework, is how you look at sustainability with a short-term lens and a long-term lens. But I think that's type of consideration you need to think, stay holistic. Obviously, I think regulations are good. I will never be quoted on that, although I just recorded it. But I do think that they give you some standards that are a good measuring stick, but you have to go beyond them. You have to go beyond them and really incorporate ESG criteria or key risk indicators or KPIs. I would prefer to talk about KPIs than KRIs into every decision you make. So how you make that is a very important consideration. And finally, is your organization ready? Because it's a cultural shift as well, if we want to embed it into the entire fabric, processes, decision-making of the organization. So how do you think about a sustainability-aware culture? Is it just training? Is it communication? Is it having champions? How are you going to go about it?
So from that perspective, you think there is a need for cultural transformation. Is that before, during, after the transformation from a business standpoint?
That's a tricky question. I think all the time, I think culture has somewhat to not transform but evolve to accommodate new business imperatives or new dimensions, new external dimensions to the business. I think it goes a lot from leadership, ultimately. So if your leaders are not prepared themselves to embrace sustainability, the organization won't be. Why would they? But I think once you have a tone from the top, and you have got the frameworks from the top, and you are starting doing the bottom up. It's how you give a voice to the people who care in the organization. And some will care, some will care less. But those people, they are very, very powerful. I do remember at Direct Line meeting this young lady, just out of internship, working in the claims side of things. And she was instrumental in making our garage green. Like, she talked to me for 15 minutes about the revolution that we had brought by having vegetable oil fueling our trucks. And these are the people who can also change things from a bottom-up perspective, but you need to find them.
And I suppose that means you need to have that top-down, bottom-up approach as well. And I suppose from a top perspective, it's about enabling the bottom to actually be able to be part of the solution, isn't it?
So governance plays a big role. And people don't like the word governance, but I think ultimately, if you look back at the definitions of it, if I remember correctly, governance is what might make your cost of capital cheaper. So why wouldn't you care? But I think it's about that notion of ownership and accountability. You need to have it from the top. You can't. I'm still in two minds about sustainability officers. I think if they sit on the exco, yes. If they don't, no, because I think sustainability is so pervasive to every operations and decision in the company that having one person coordinate is fine. Having one person owning it is a bit of a risk. And there's always the risk that you turn, that's sustainability, that's your deal. We have the same problem with controls. There's a chief control officer now. So, I've got a problem with my control, but that's your problem, not mine. So I think that ownership and clarity of accountability is very important, but then needs to be kind of cascaded down. And once you have got that, you need to be very systematic. My approach is about how you go about the traditional risk processes, identification, stakeholder engagement in the risk identification. And by the way, you need to identify both the opportunities and the risk, as you would do for any other risk. The assessment of it, the prioritization, which needs to be slightly guided by the strategy, very much guided actually by the strategic goals of a company. The training, the repeat, learn from, improve constantly, but you need to be very systematic, and to be very systematic about making sure that these key risk indicators or KPIs on sustainability are part of a decision process. You definitely need that top level buy-in and governance.
And I think you've already started elaborating on that. How do you ensure the sustainability objective as defined in the goals are actually complement the risk framework and risk objectives as well and do not go in the opposite direction?
I think in that same way, it's just, I think if they are aligned overall with a strategy, why would they? I think if they come from a regulatory requirements to model your 3-year VAR, then yes, you might find somebody who is going to tell you, well, I'm sorry, I'm still going to buy that reinsurance cover, even if it makes it a bit more expensive, because I think commercially that makes sense. So I think it's about that really alignment about what sustainability means for the company and how it is going to benefit the commercial objective. After that, it should become easier. The problem is often measurement more than alignment, because I think, there's still problems with alignment, but I think more and more companies are getting there. I think the measurement is what scares people. Okay, we're going to make decision on it, but what are we measuring? And that's where I think it can be quite difficult to look at 2 or 3 indicators and not 10, or 10 and not 2, when you make decisions on how you prioritize these indicators and what they tell you.
Well, and I think from an insurance industry standpoint, the industry itself is in a better place for some of those aspects than pretty much any other industry because, for example, climate risk, it's been your bread and butter for so many years, in fact, much longer than that. That other industry might not even have access to any of the data you guys must have as well.
There's a lot of data. Data is not, we had this discussion earlier during the panel that I was part of. Data is plenty. What you do with it is always the issue. And And that's what scares people, as I said. I think the insurance industry is... if you Google it, you will find people who contradict me, but I would say more interestingly exposed. Why? Because what we are there to do is to protect the well-being, physical and financial, of our customers, much more than the mortgage lender, etc. And that includes, savings and everything. So I think it's Amanda Blanc, and as a CEO, I'm not quoting her because I can't remember how she said it, but I read it. It was, therefore, whatever matters to our customers has to matter to us. So if planet has an impact on our customers, then it matters to us. Otherwise, we are not doing our duty, I would say. So I think where it becomes interesting with insurance is the role we play in the transition to net zero. We have, I think, a massive role and a massive responsibility that comes with it to play in accompanying our customers in that transition. How do we incentivize homeowners to become more green? How do you make sure that after a flood we repair better for avoid the next flood? Because otherwise, if we don't do that, whilst home insurance itself doesn't contribute massively to carbon emissions, even at a level 3 underwriting level, we can't continue to increase premiums over the next 25 years without becoming it unaffordable for most. And that's what I was saying, is like you can't then separate the E and the S, because you need to think about that transition and what does it mean for pricing home insurance and etc. And what are the products you are going to put into the market that help with that transition? Because if you help your customers, you obviously take on less risk, so it's going to help us as well.
How do we make that work? So what are the obstacles you've observed in terms of doing that integration, and how can they be overcome effectively?
I think the usual obstacles are data, obviously. And again, I don't think it's because we're lacking data. It's data silos. So you're going to have data in a part of a business which is underwriting, aviation, and you don't have the same data somewhere else. So then how do you aggregate it into something which means something? But the data silos and that integration of the data lakes within companies is often an obstacle. Resistance to change. For anything that you do, you always have to take into account, as I said earlier, whether the organization is ready, and how do you overcome the skeptics? How do you overcome the ones which are blatantly telling you yes but saying no behind? Or those people who are very just focused on the P of profit and don't think about planet and people, and you're going to come across them. I think conflicting priorities is a big one. A number of time over the last few years, wherever business is going through rough times, sustainability slips down to the bottom of the pile. Well, we'd love to do that, but we don't really have time right now because we are scarce on resources, whether it's money or people, and we need to focus on making sure that we are profitable next quarter, otherwise our share price will be slashed. So the conflicting priorities I find the most difficult and the most real, because you can't ask your team to spend 2 weeks working on a particular risk modeling for social impacts if that's not number one priority right now for the organization, and there's you need to make sure that the organization survives. So I think that's one. There's still a lack of understanding of, again, I don't like ESG, but sustainability and what it is. Interestingly, earlier the audience asked, but sustainability is so vague, how do we define it? But I think the fact that people are uncomfortable with that overall level of wording and terminology means that a lot of people still can't put it in their head. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the business I work for? So I think that is still requiring a lot of awareness training And a lot, same thing as cyber risk 5 years ago. Now everybody knows what a phishing email is, but 5 years ago people were like, what? So I think there's a lot of training to be done and communication to be done. I think that would be it for the biggest obstacles.
Those things take time as well, right?
They do.
So, climate has been around for a long time. Not all organizations clearly have been paying attention to it. Now they have to. The other aspect, they need to translate to what it means to them as well, and that is not going to be done overnight. And what do you think, what is the role of regulation in all of that in terms of helping that transition in your view?
Well, as I said, I think regulatory requirements set some very useful standards for how you can measure and report on sustainability. I think we do need more regulation to allow a level playing field as well, especially if you are a quoted company or you are not privately owned and you are effectively relying on institutional investors, because the BlackRock of this world have been very clear they don't want to invest into businesses which are not having sustainability at the core. That's great, but until investors, analysts, portfolio managers have a consistent way of measuring the effort of a company, then it's never going to be a level playing field. So I think it's quite important that converge to consistent reporting standards across Europe and the rest of the world, which might not be the case anytime soon. So I think that's important for investors, so it's important for companies. I think the regulator has done some really good stuff. The PI has been very instrumental in the UK about telling us to think about modeling after 1 year, because our capital models are a 1 year DA, effectively. And through the ORSA, they have asked us to start modeling 3-5 year scenarios. I don't think these scenarios have yet taught us a lot more than we already knew. But I think as this evolves, and it can be quite thought-provoking, and I think it's quite useful. I think the trick, though, is that there's an ongoing dialogue and interaction with regulators or big associations like the ABI to understand the direction of travel and what is really, really useful.
And again, that's going to take time. It's, from my experience, and I don't know if it's the same in insurance, one of the issues I've seen in capital modeling over beyond 1 year is the quality of the scenarios that are being used, which do not factor enough depth in them to actually be of any value. So there is probably a need of changing that and also considering probably past 5 years, because climate decision being made now have a 15 to 20 to 30 years time horizon in terms of effectiveness as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. I think the physical risk area is well mastered now, but I think the transition risk part is still quite very high level. And one example in particular is the difficulty we have in insurance to measure the impact of the transition on level 3 underwriting emissions, which are effectively the car for our client that we are insuring. What is its carbon footprint? So obviously, if we transition everybody to the EV, that will be great, which is what is happening. But I think when you model that at the moment, it's still very much blunt and probably not reflective of the reality. So I think you need to take a stance that whatever you're modeling is probably underestimating your risks.
And do you have any example of companies who did that well?
Look, I can't put one in my head on financial services, because I would lie if I said that some of the companies I worked for are doing it very well. I think some insurance companies have a very clear public stance on sustainability. Aviva is probably a leader in that field, and I think they breathe it. Ageas, actually, in Europe, has a very, very strong narrative, if you look at their report and accounts, on sustainability being totally part of their strategy through and through, and it flows through the entire report and accounts. It's amazing. But outside of that, you have had good. Unilever is often the case in point. In the 2010, you have Paul Dolman saying, "That's it. We're completely changing the strategy. We're going green." And it has been forced into the company very quickly. But actually, the last 15 years, they have been breathing sustainability. And you can't do that if it's not in your risk management. So I don't know their risk management framework, but I would assume that every decision they had made, they looked at it with a risk angle on, if we launch this product, is it sustainable? What is going to be the social impact of this initiative? Is the governance good enough in this part of the business? So I think they have really done excellently. Nestle has done some good stuff. Salesforce even has done some good stuff. Microsoft is doing some good stuff as well. There's a lot of companies, interestingly, in the manufacturing world, which are probably more carbon intensive than financial services, but have kind of led the way on, integrating strategy and risk management.
I think in the consumer product space, Pepsi has been a good example of that under their former CEO, where they really looked into from all angles, from production to actually sourcing, water utilization for their products as well, were all considerations which I found fascinating in terms of the holistic approach to the business.
And it is so complex. I mean, I've done one of the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership course recently, and just the complexity of looking through your entire operations and value chain, from supply chain to raw materials to the end product, and understanding at each stage what you're consuming from a climate angle, but also how you're selling it and to whom you're selling it is massive, is very significant task.
And if we project ourselves a little bit, what future trends and innovation do you see at that cross-section between sustainability and risk management?
Well, I think data analytics are going to be having a massive role to play on, are already starting to play a role on sustainability, and AI-driven risk assessments could be a very powerful things to support sustainability decisions. I think thinking about supply chain, if you start using blockchain, that would be fantastic in terms of having transparency. Because supply chains are a big issue for everybody in every industry. We have the same issue with cyber. I mean, most of the exposures we have to ransomwares usually is from our third-party suppliers. It's the same thing with sustainability. So transparency there. And I'm saying blockchain as a buzzword, but I think there's real possibility in terms of the new technology coming to the rescue of helping us sort out that sustainability dilemmas.
Which in itself brings a different discussion around the scope of the change that needs to take place, because if you take blockchain, it has to be an industry-wide response. It cannot be one player, otherwise it doesn't work. So those technologies in themselves are quite fascinating, I must say, but probably not for today.
But it's a very good point in the sense of, I think, the only way we are going to tackle the transition to net zero is a lot of collaboration, including with regulators. They disbanded the alliance. Well, they didn't disband in the UK, but the Net Zero Alliance was, plummeted by US politics, and then they reformed it with the idea that if a regulator is in it, then it's going to be very transparent from a competition point of view. But we also need to collaborate across industry, and insurers have to collaborate with green developers if we are to insure homes in the future. So I think that cross-collaboration is going to be absolutely crucial.
And I think you've already given an answer to the next question, but I'm going to ask it again if you have anything else to add to it. One piece of advice would you give to any organization looking to integrate sustainability into their risk management?
Start at the top. Because otherwise most of your efforts is going to be lost and the risk function will be sidelined.
And to conclude, Here I'm going to broaden it to the people, actually.
Okay.
Any final advice for any emerging risk leaders or someone looking to make a career in that space?
Don't become a chief risk officer.
It's like a lot of them would love to do that.
I'm just teasing, but when I saw that question, I was thinking of one of my friends, Charles Garvret, who told me recently, he sent me a beautiful graph about it, which I don't have to hand. Being a chief risk officer is anything but than what is written on your job spec. So you're being asked many things that you never thought you would be asked. You need to be the friend, the challenger, you need to be Ella's team man, you need to be all of that. So be mindful of that when you do a career in risk. But it's very rewarding. So my advice would be, you can't be complacent because the risk landscape is constantly evolving and faster. So you need to be extremely curious and have very low ego. That would be my advice. And keep going, be perseverant.
Well, Aurore, thank you so much for your time today. It was a treat. And I hope I can welcome you again on this show at some point in the future when you land your next role. Future CRO again?
Yeah,
or something else?
Possibly. We'll see. I'll keep you posted.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Julien. Thank you.
Bye.
As I conclude this conversation with Aurore Lecanon, I'm truly inspired by your perspectives in integrating sustainability into risk management, navigating the complexities of cultural and gender dynamics, and embracing innovation in an ever-evolving risk landscape. Aurore's journey, characterized by your strategic vision and commitment to driving positive change, highlights the importance of holistic thinking, collaboration, and the courage to challenge the status quo. So a big thank you to Aurore for sharing our invaluable experiences and insights with us on RiskMasters today. Her story is a powerful reminder that embracing sustainability, fostering diversity, and continuously innovating are key to building resilient and future-ready organizations. To dive deeper into today's episode and access show notes, transcript, and more, please visit my website avideo.com. And remember, keep pushing boundaries, keep making an impact, and never shy away from becoming the master of your destiny. Until the next time.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhaye.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.